All right, so in our last lesson, we started looking at hormones. And so we're going to continue with the topic on hormones today. And what we did the last time had been the most part of what we should be doing under hormones. And so today we have less to do to finish up with that topic. And then what it means is that after we are done with hormones today, we will be left with biotransformation in the syllabus to cover. And biotransformation is also something that does not entail so much that we should be able to complete in one lecture, so that the next time that we meet, we'll be finishing with the very last topic, which is biotransformation. And then we can concentrate on some questions online to solve. At least if we finish about 2 weeks earlier, it means that you have enough time to do some revision, answer some more questions online in preparation towards your final exams. So to recap on what we did the last time, we looked at the hormones that are released by the hypothalamus, which act on the anterior pituitary. So we talk about the hormone-releasing hormone, the corticotropin-releasing hormone, gonadotropin-releasing hormone, the growth-releasing hormone, growth-releasing inhibiting hormone, the prolactin-releasing inhibiting hormone. All of these are acting on the anterior pituitary to release the thyroid-stimulating hormone, adrenocorticoid hormone, the luteinizing hormone, follicle-stimulating hormone, growth hormone, prolactin. And these are the various glands from which these hormones are being released. So if you take a critical look at this diagram, which we have on the right-hand side, you realize that we have various glands from the brain to the throat, the thyroid gland, and then we have pancreas, the adrenal gland, which are on top of the kidneys, and then we have the testes and the ovaries, which also secretes some sex hormones. So you realize we had been looking at these glands and hormones that are being released from the head going down. So today we are going to look at the hormones that will be released from these glands. So we'll look at the thyroid hormones, the adrenal corticosteroids, estrogens, progestins, androgens, hormones, some other hormones that will be released, maybe in the gastrointestinal tract. We'll be looking at that. Now, we also talk about the fact that the hypothalamus acting almost like a master gland, which is releasing these releasing hormones that are acting on the anterior pituitary to release the stimulating hormones for these glands to release the hormones that they should release to the various target tissues to carry out their biochemical activities. But the posterior pituitary is not under the influence of hypothalamus and is responsible for the release of antidiuretic hormone, which is responsible for water regulation and balance in the kidneys. Then we have the oxytocin, which is also acting in the uterine contraction in labor. So what it means is we should be moving downwards to the hormones which will be secreted by the thyroid glands, the pancreas, adrenal gland, testes. But before then, you realize that there is one gland also hiding somewhere here at the top in the brain, which is the pineal gland. So let's take a look at that pineal gland before we move downwards. So the pineal gland produces the hormone referred to as melatonin. So it produces melatonin, and melatonin is responsible for sleep pattern regulation. So what happens is this is stimulated by light. So daylight or night darkness will have influence on the secretion of melatonin, so that as it gets dark, when the amount of light that is entering the eye gets lower, then you have the stimulation of the pineal gland to secrete melatonin. And so melatonin will increase in the blood somewhere between 8 p.m. in the night all the way till the next morning about 5, 6 a.m. so that you have what is referred to as the circadian rhythm, that is commonly referred to as a biological clock. Melatonin is regulating that, so that in the night you should be able to have a good sleep, and during the day you should be able to wake up. And that is in humans. Of course, melatonin has been found in some plants as well. Some of them not really known the function that they are carrying out in those plants. But some, it's seen that yes, it's also having some function as it has in vertebrates. That is also having some effect in the regulation of the circadian rhythm. Now, it's not only the circadian rhythm, which is the daily biological clock of having to go to sleep at the end of the day and waking up at the beginning of the day, but also it regulates the sleep patterns with seasons. So, for instance, if you are in the temperate regions where they have 4 distinct seasons: the winter, the summer, autumn, and spring. You realize if you are in those places, in winter, even during the day, because most of the times it is a little bit dark, you feel kind of dizzy. During the day, you will want to sleep because there is less light entering your eyes. Similar things will happen when you are in autumn, right before winter comes. You feel such kind of dizziness. Then in spring, when you have winter going away and before summer comes, there is some activity. There is much more activity in you. You don't have melatonin being released in large quantities. Now, if we are talking about melatonin regulating sleep, then of course, any dysfunction in the production of these hormones can cause some form of sleep disorders, such as insomnia, that is sleeplessness during the night, and even sometimes some mood disorders like depression. Some psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia can also be caused by dysfunction in the release of these hormones. Now, in the development of humans, so from about 1 to 2 years, you have melatonin being released not in regular amounts. So because the body is now developing and all these things take time to be regularized. So you have melatonin being released irregularly so that the child, will sleep not with the pattern that adults sleep with. But after that, from that 2 years upwards all the way to puberty, you have melatonin being released in regular amounts. And so then the sleep pattern changes to that of an adult. The release of melatonin can also be reduced in old age, so that at an old age, you will be having some kind of sleeplessness sometimes, and even sometimes some insomnia. So these are some of the things which can happen with the release of melatonin, and some dysfunctions that may occur with the pineal gland and the release of melatonin from it. All right, so now we can move forward as we have talked about the pineal gland also in the brain. So we go downwards now. So we go to the thyroid hormones, which are released by the thyroid glands. Just a few moments. I see someone's microphone is on, is making noise. Okay, so we're looking at thyroid hormones, which are released by the thyroid gland. And here, of course, we're taking it right from hypothalamus, as we saw in the previous diagram. Hypothalamus is having some influence on the release of thyroid releasing hormone, which will then act on the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which will act on thyroid gland to release the thyroid hormones. Now, these thyroid hormones are divided into two main types. So we have the tetraiodothyronine, also referred to as thyroxine. Tetraiodo meaning that you are having 4 iodides on these 2 6-carbon rings. Now, if you take a critical look at this structure, you realize that this is a derivative of the amino acid tyrosine. So this is the carboxylic side of that amino acid. This is the amine side. So if you take this to be the side chain, so the side chain will have this aromatic ring with a hydroxyl group and OH here. But in place of the OH on tyrosine, you have a second 6-carbon ring with a hydroxyl group on it attached to it. So kind of 2 rings being joined with an ether-like bond between them. And you have these iodides on carbon 3 and 5 of the 2 rings. And so that is referred to as tetraiodo thyron. The second one is triiodo. So triiodo because it's having just 3 iodides. So 2 on carbon 3, carbon 5 of 1 ring, and then 1 on the carbon 3 of the other ring. You can have either this or you have the reverse, where you have only 1 iodide on the first ring that is directly attached as to the side chain, and then 2 rings on the second ring. So if you look at these two, you realize this ring, this terminal ring is having only 1 iodide, but this terminal ring here is having 2, and this is having 1. Here, this ring is having 2, whilst this is having 1 as triiodo. So we refer to this second one as a reverse triiodo thyron. Now, these thyroid hormones act in various biochemical activities, and you see they are being listed here. The first of them being increasing metabolic rate. So what you see these thyroid hormones do is that they increase the uptake of oxygen by the tissues, and thus increasing cellular respiration. So they increase the metabolic rate of all of these biochemical reactions that are various biochemical reactions that are occurring in the cells. Similarly, you have the increase in protein synthesis. So if you look at the synthesis of protein, the stage of transcription, which is the synthesis of the messenger RNA from the DNA before that is translated into protein, in that process of protein synthesis. These thyroid hormones act as activators of the process of transcription. Similarly, for carbohydrate metabolism, these thyroid glands act. I think we have seen some of these thyroid glands, thyroid hormones acting in the metabolism of lipids as well. So we see some of them acting as in that process of formation of cyclic adenosine monophosphate from ATP, which will be acting as a second messenger in another process regulating, say, the utilization of lipids, that is the breakdown of lipids into glycerol and free fatty acids for their use. So in that process of lipolysis. And in carbohydrate metabolism, they will be acting in the process of the breakdown of glycogen in the liver and in the skeletal muscles into glucose. So they will be increasing the glucose concentration in the blood for its uptake by the cells to generate energy. Then, of course, they will also be acting on the kidneys in the maintenance of water and electrolyte balance. So for the reabsorption of water by the distal tubes of the kidneys, you see these hormones also acting in the regulation of this process. Now, apart from these thyroid hormones, the triiodothyronine, which is represented T3, and the tetraiodothyronine, which is also called thyroxine, represented T4. Apart from these two main hormones which are released by the thyroid glands, we also have a minor hormone being released by these glands referred to as calcitonin, which is responsible for the regulation of calcium metabolism, because that will fall under mineral metabolism. So what it does is in the event of reduction of calcium concentration in the blood, you have calcitonin acting for the release of some more calcium from the bone marrow into the blood. And of course, as we have just said, calcium acts as a cofactor to several enzymes. Calcium will also act in the synthesis of the cyclic adenosine monophosphate, which is a second messenger. So in various reactions, you find these calcium ions acting, and you find calcitonin as the hormone that is regulating the metabolism of calcium. All right, so the thyroid gland, I think generally we have known that thyroid gland actually carries out its function with iodine being incorporated in the hormones to be active. Now, the thyroid stimulating hormone promotes the oxidation of iodides into their active form before they are incorporated into these hormones. So you find that an iodide, this is the inactive iodide, which gets activated into the oxidized iodide form, which would then get incorporated into the hormone. So what we are talking about is, if you look at these structures here, you see the iodides which are being incorporated into the hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine. So what we are looking at is the oxidation of these ions before they are incorporated into the hormone. And this process is catalyzed by the thyroperoxidase. The enzyme that catalyzes this reaction is the thyroperoxidase. And this oxidation reaction occurs with the presence of hydrogen peroxide. And of course, we are seeing nicotinamide nucleotides as electron carriers. This time around, they are acting as some donors of protons in this reaction for the conversion of the inactive iodide into the active iodide before they are incorporated into the hormones. Now, there are these abnormalities which may occur with some dysfunction in the release of thyroid hormones from the thyroid gland. So for instance, the first we are seeing here is the enlargement of the thyroid gland, which happens in the case of deficiency in iodine. You find the enlargement of the thyroid gland, and you see that in the enlargement in the throat. Now, if we are talking about thyroid glands acting in the metabolism of carbohydrates, of proteins, of lipids, that tells you that if you have less amount of thyroid glands being released into the blood, it will affect the metabolism of these biomolecules. And that can result into various forms of abnormalities. The first, which is the hypothyroidism, which is the low amount of these thyroid glands being produced, can result into what is referred to as cretinism in children. And that is some physical retardation in growth. So you having mostly you will see that in the form of retardation in the growth in height of the children. It can also result into retardation in mental capabilities. So some mental retardation may occur in the case of hypothyroidism. In adults, we see what is referred to as myxoedema, which is you see there is some kind of puffiness under the eyes, as if the person is not sleeping well. You have that kind of puffiness under the eyes, which is caused, partly because there is some kind of water retention which is happening in the person. Now, the hyperthyroidism, that is, you have much more of these thyroid glands being released than normal. Here again, if we look further and see the functions being in the increase in metabolic rates, increase in protein synthesis, increase in the metabolism of carbohydrates, and the increase in the utilization of lipids, then of course we can make that inference that yes, if you are having hyperthyroidism, what is going to happen is that you are going to have some form of hypermetabolism, meaning an increased rate of metabolism beyond the normal, so that you'll be having something like loss of weight, because much of the proteins, much of the carbohydrates, the lipids are being broken down at a very high rate, such that you are mostly feeling hungry you have this loss of weight and you have some form of irritability. There will be some rapid heart rate. And of course, if there is that rapid metabolism happening and you have to be, you are feeling weak all the time, a lot of these biomolecules which will be giving you energy nutrients are being broken down quickly and being excreted from the body. Then, of course, you have some loss of weight, some anxiety. Charles, I'll go a few minutes. I'll let you speak. Then we have the last thing, which is the exothalamus, which you find that you see that symptom of someone with some bulging eyes out as one of the symptoms of hyperthyroidism. Of course, you have some drugs such as the metronidazole, thiourea, thiouracil, which act as inhibitors to the activation of iodides into the active form before they are incorporated into the hormones. And with these inhibitors, you are able to prevent some treatment for hyperthyroidism. Now, these conditions usually can be managed with some form of hormone therapy. All right, so I saw the hand of Charles Agboja. So Charles, you wanted to say something? Patrick, okay, let me see. Patrick, I'm listening, you can speak.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Patrick.
Sir, please, how is hypothyroidism treated?
So that is just what I was talking about, that these conditions can be treated with some form of hormonal therapy. So it is either you have inhibitors such as metronidazole, thiourea, thiouracil, which are used to inhibit the activation of the inactive iodide to active iodide to be incorporated into the hormone. So that is for hyperthyroidism. But for hypothyroidism, it will have to be the opposite, so that it will rather be some activators, some hormones which are known. So it will be that you have a hormone which will have effect on the thyroid stimulating hormone. So as you can see, the thyroid stimulating hormone promotes oxidation. So there are forms of drugs which are analogs of thyroid stimulating hormone, so that when they are introduced into the body, these will act as increasing the concentration of thyroid stimulating hormone, which goes to stimulate the oxidation of the inactive iodide to the active iodide. And then you'll be able to increase the release of the thyroid glands. So that will be the treatment of hypothyroidism. Yes, who again? Patrick, is your hand still up? Is your hand still up, Patrick? I think I saw Charles Agboja raise his hand.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Sir, please, when does the pineal gland secrete melatonin?
So I was saying that the secretion of melatonin is controlled by the amount of light that is entering the eye. And so you have the pineal gland secreting melatonin in the night to induce sleep. And usually it's going to be the increase in blood is going to be between 8 p.m. all the way to up to in the morning when you have to wake up, the secretion of this hormone reduces. In fact, somewhere around midnight up to about 2 a.m., you have the highest concentration of melatonin being secreted into the blood. Yes, I see more hands up. Charles. Charles.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Sir. Sometimes I realize when I eat, it will not take long for the food to it will take the food digest very fast, and I feel hungry again. So the releasing of the thyroid stimulating hormone, is it dependent on weather or environmental factors such as temperature?
Okay, so when the question you are asking is to do with the fact that in some weather conditions, sometimes when it is cold, it's a rainy day, you really don't feel that hungry. But when it is that sunny day, you feel more hungry. Then you also ask a question pertaining to yourself, that when you eat sometimes, it doesn't take long before you feel hungry again. Of course, in that personal question, we cannot relate that without any form of a test and diagnosis. Sometimes it's just that the food you have eaten is not enough. You are doing much more than what you have eaten. And so you feel hungry again. It does not necessarily mean that you are having any form of hyperthyroidism. In fact, if it is hyperthyroidism, there is serious, severe loss of weight. And in addition to some other symptoms, as you can see, the rapid heart rate, some anxiety, weakness, the bulging out of the eyes. There are these symptoms which clearly show that there is something that is wrong with you, and not necessarily that because you are feeling hungry faster than sometimes usual, that it means that you are having some hyperthyroidism. Now, to do with the weather conditions, this one, what happens is, let me say, it's some form of homeostasis. So, the body, the reason why you find us eating all the time is because we are warm-blooded animals. We need to keep our temperature at that around 36.5, 37 degrees Celsius. And where we get that from is from the metabolic reactions that are happening in us. And it is the food we eat that gives us the energy for us to maintain that temperature, that homeostasis of the body. So that at times when it is kind of not really warm or it is hot. In fact, if you find yourself in some temperate regions in winter, you will find yourself actually wanting to eat more because you need more heat in the body temperature to actually carry you through than when it is during summer. So we cannot relate directly the weather on the release of these hormones, but in general, you will have it, having some effect on the homeostasis of the body. It will act on different other things, not just the hormones. So these weather conditions will act even on the let me say, the activity of enzymes. Yes, so different things will be happening at the same time in a complex. So we can't refer it directly to just these hormones. I can see there are some more hands coming up. Pencil, Jamila. Pencil. All right, Pencil is not talking. Charles, do you want to say anything else? Or is the first time you raise your hand that you forgot to put it down? Patrick, your hand is still up. Patrick, you want to say something? Or is the first time you raise your hand that is still up? All right, Charles, you too. You don't want to say anything?
Yes, sir.
Uh-huh.
Sir, concerning the release of the melatonin, said it's controlled by the amount of light entering the eye.
Yes.
Sometimes you on the lights, but you will be able to sleep. Sometimes you wake up and it's dark and you will not feel sleepy. So how can we explain that?
Yes, it is true that you sleep and you wake up. Yes. But what I'm saying is that the circadian rhythm, which is, let's say, commonly referred to as the biological clock, so that on a normal day, if it gets late, dark in the night, that you should feel sleepy. But of course, if it happens that you have been working, people go for night shifts, you feel sleepy even in the middle of that night shift. Sometimes very deep sleep will come heavy on you. And that is because of the release of this hormone, melatonin, in the blood. But if you resist it, if you resist that sleep up to a point, say about 1 a.m., 2 a.m. in the night, you haven't slept, you resist it up to that point, you will not sleep again because you have resisted the action of the hormone for you to sleep for that long, that it no longer acts until later when you are really, really tired the morning before you go to sleep. The hormone is there naturally, it will induce the sleep, but you as a human being, you also have some control to resist some of these things. So that is why it happens so that yes, even though there is light during the day, you still are able to sleep during the day when you are really tired, or sometimes even there are some foods that you eat which will induce sleep. It's because, like I said from the beginning, melatonin is being found in some plants, and that tells you that some of the foods that you eat, depending on the combination of these foods, after eating it, can increase the concentration of melatonin in the blood, so that when you finish eating, sometimes you start to feel sleepy. Sometimes you feel sleepy, even during the day. Yes. Charles, your hand is still up. Patrick.
So you say,
Mm-hmm.
sir, is melatonin only useful to fall asleep?
Is there what?
Is melatonin only useful to fall asleep?
Oh, yes, of course. Melatonin is useful to fall asleep. It is useful. And that is why in the developmental process, you have its release being regularized right after childhood, after 2 years, all the way to about, say, in your teen ages, you have melatonin release being regularized so that you now have the sleep pattern of an adult. And no, it also has effect on sexual development. I think earlier there was something that I mentioned that some dysfunction can be to do with precocious puberty. That is sex development coming in a person much earlier than it should. And that's, in fact, can cause some kind of social behavior abnormalities. It can cause such kind of a thing. Yes. Jamila. Okay, I think Jamila is not ready to speak. Severally, she has raised her hand, but she's not saying anything.
Hello, sir.
Yes,
I'm sorry, please don't give me the privilege to speak. That's why I couldn't speak.
There is what?
My question. So please, my question is on the production of the melatonin.
Mm-hmm. But it's been answered, right?
My observation. No.
So what's the question?
Yes. Please, my question is that my observation, I realize that when I take in caffeine or
when you take in what?
I'm not able to sleep. Caffeine or energy drink.
I didn't hear that.
I'm not able.
But anyways, there's some food. When you take in some food.
When I take in energy drink or
Energy
caffeine
drink.
or caffeine,
Yes.
I'm not able to sleep. So does it go to prevent the production of the melatonin or it inhibits it?
Okay, so I know, like it is known that these drinks, they contain caffeine, and caffeine is known to inhibit, I think, the production of the cyclic adenosine monophosphate. So which goes in, if you go back to one of our lectures where we look at one of these, I think the cyclic adenosine monophosphate, you look in that process of breakdown of lipids, of course, which also has some effect on the breakdown of carbohydrates to give energy. There is some effect over there. But apart from that, one other thing which happens is that generally we have two kinds of human beings. The first is what we refer to as fast metabolizers, and the second is what slow metabolizers. So that as you take in the caffeine or that energy drink that you are taking, and another person is also taking that same thing, if the two of you are two different phenotypes, you realize that perhaps the other person who is taking that same drink will fall asleep because of that energy drink that he has drank might cause him the opposite of what it is causing you. And this is to do with the two of you being two different phenotypes. And this is to do with polymorphism of some specific genes. The same thing happens with alcohol metabolism. So two people can be drinking the same kind of alcohol at the same time. One person becomes very drunk and the other person is just normal. Nothing is happening to the person because the person is being able to metabolize that drug and it goes out really fast, like getting excreted out so quickly, like just out of urine or sweat, it's gone. But the other person is retaining much of that in the body because its metabolism is slow. So these things are also there. So there are complexities of things that are happening. You cannot really pinpoint one thing just from your head that this is what is causing what is happening. That is why sometimes some of these things, a series of tests will have to be carried out. before you can actually come to a conclusion of what really is happening. All right, so let's continue. So from the thyroid glands, we move on to the adrenal glands. So the adrenal glands, which are on top of the kidneys, will be releasing or secreting several hormones. In fact, about more than 50 adrenal corticosteroids are known to be secreted by the adrenal cortex. So what you see here is the inner part of the adrenal gland. So you see here the adrenal cortex, and then the inner part being the medulla. Now, the adrenal cortex releases some hormones, and the medulla also releases some hormones. So first of all, we look at the outer portion of the adrenal gland, which is the adrenal cortex, which is releasing more than 50 steroid hormones, referred to as adrenocorticosteroids. And these are divided into three main groups, being the glucocorticoids. The second is the mineralocorticoids. And the third group are the sex hormones, which are the androgens and estrogens. So the glucocorticoids, right from the name, gluco tells you that it has something to do with carbohydrate metabolism. And of course, its action is opposite to that of insulin. You know, insulin comes in to reduce the amount of glucose that is in blood. And that is that it stimulates the process of glycogenesis. That is, if there is enough carbohydrates already in the blood, there is enough glucose already in the blood, then the excess of it goes into the production of glycogen, which is stored in the liver or it is stored in the skeletal muscles. But the glucocorticoids do the opposite of this, so that they will rather stimulate the breakdown of glycogen to give you glucose, to increase the glucose concentration in the blood. That will give you energy. And examples of these are cortisol and corticosterone. Then the mineralocorticoids here also regulate water and electrolyte balance. So these they do through you remember, one of the hormones that are secreted by the posterior pituitary is the antidiuretic hormone. So, and you remember, I said earlier that if not because of the antidiuretic hormone, humans will be releasing about 20 liters of water in a day. But because we have the antidiuretic hormone to regulate water balance in the body, you know, some reabsorption of water happens in the distal tubes of the kidneys. And so you have the mineralocorticoids also acting in that process. An example of that is the aldosterone. Then, of course, we have non-androgens and estrogens as sex hormones that regulate the secondary sexual development, even the secondary sexual characteristics. In men, you have a deeper voice, the growth of the facial hair, in addition to other pubic hairs. In the females, estrogens will regulate the secondary sexual characteristics, the growth of breast becoming more feminine. You have these androgens and estrogens acting in males and females respectively. Then we move on to the hormones which are released by the medulla. So, well, before then, we look at some of the abnormalities that may occur with adrenocortical function. So, since we have talk about the fact that you have the glucocorticoids, which are acting in that process of carbohydrate metabolism. That is the breakdown of glycogen to glucose to give you energy. It means a dysfunction of that. So we refer to this as Addison's disease. A dysfunction of the glucocorticoids will mean that that will result into hypoglycemia, not enough of glucose in the blood for energy. And that will result in some loss of weight, some muscle weakness, impaired cardiac function. So you see the dysfunction of some of these hormones. You saw even with the thyroid glands that they are acting in the metabolism of these biomolecules, carbohydrates, proteins, lipids. So dysfunction in any of these things could be resulting in things like weight loss, muscle weakness, things which really you don't really know what is happening unless you go for several tests. Because if somebody is losing weight, you might be thinking the person is just not eating, the person should eat. You know, somebody is suffering from hypoglycemia, you quickly, you can quickly just say, oh, you are lacking, you are not eating well, eat that sort of thing. But the person can be eating and still the person is suffering from these things. So unless you go in further, so many tests will have to be done to reveal that actually there is something wrong with some hormonal function. Then what is referred to as the Cushing's syndrome, which is a hyperfunction of the adrenal cortex. That would mean that there is release more of these hormones, and of course it will result in the opposite of hypoglycemia, which will be what? Hyperglycemia, because the release of more of these glucocorticoids, for instance, is going to cause much breakdown than normal of glycogen to glucose into the bloodstream. Of course, some of these can be caused by some tumors of the adrenal cortex, and that further can be caused by some tumors in the pituitary, because of course the control of the release of these hormones, remember, is coming all the way from hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, and then it trickles down to these glands which are releasing these hormones. And so some growth of tumor, some form of dysfunction of the adrenal cortex and the anterior pituitary can actually have a whole lot to do. The anterior pituitary, any dysfunction of it will have a lot to do with hormonal imbalance. All right. So now we move on to the adrenal medulla. So the adrenal medulla releases two major hormones, epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline, and norepinephrine, which is noradrenaline. Now we have here the structure of norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is being compared to the structure of dopamine. Actually, norepinephrine and epinephrine are referred to as derivatives of catechol. So this is the structure of catechol. You have this 6-ring structure, the benzene ring, having 2 hydroxyls on it, and you have that as catechol. And dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter, happens also to be a derivative of catechol. And what you see here is just some side chain which is attached to the catechol ring with some amine group at the end, and that gives you dopamine. Now, if you look at the structure of dopamine, so you can also say epinephrine and norepinephrine are derivatives of the neurotransmitter dopamine, so that the only difference you see is that you see on this alpha carbon, which is being attached to the catechol molecule, you have a hydroxyl group in place of one of the hydrogens in dopamine, whilst in epinephrine, You have the hydroxyl group. I think this place should actually be CH, not CH2. So that's a mistake. It should be CH. So you have a hydroxyl group attached again on the same alpha carbon. But on the amine group, you now have a methyl group in epiphenyl. So the difference between norepinephrine and epiphenyl is that in epiphenyl, you have a methyl group, which is on the amine group, but norepinephrine does not have that. Now, these hormones are released in emergency situations where there is the need for enough energy to be released for the cells. So, epinephrine, norepinephrine, or adrenaline, noradrenaline are being referred to as hormones of fight, flight, or fright. So in such emergency situations where either you have to react very fast, you either run or you fight back or whatever, you have the release of carbohydrates or lipids. So you have this metabolism of carbohydrates and lipids being increased at very high amounts. And you have epinephrine and norepinephrine being responsible for such emergency situations. Then we have the dysfunction or abnormality which occur in terms of the release of these hormones being referred to as the pheochromocytomas, which is the occurrence of tumors of the adrenal medulla. So a tumor in the adrenal medulla, which of course will be resulting into excessive production of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Of course, if that is happening, it also means that excessive metabolism of carbohydrates and lipids, and that can cause some severe hypertension. All right, so that is to do with the adrenal hormones. So we have just looked at the hormones of the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla. So now we move on to that last gland that we see below, which is the gonads. So the gonads, these are the testes, the ovaries, which are responsible also for the release of sex hormones. So you see up here we saw the adrenal cortex that is above the kidneys. We see that releases some androgens and some estrogens. Then we are also seeing that there is release of these androgens and estrogens again by the gonads, that is the testes and the ovaries. And these steroid hormones are, of course, as we have seen, responsible for the secondary sexual characteristics in development. So apart from these two, which we have looked at already, we see the third one, which is progesterone, which is responsible for the implantation of the fertilized ovum and the maintenance of pregnancy. Of course, these androgens are responsible for, this apart from the secondary sexual characteristics in males, also responsible for the process of spermatogenesis, the production of the sperm cells, and somehow also responsible for the much more aggressive nature that you find of men. Estrogen also has that influence on the maintenance of the menstrual cycle, and in general on the reproductive process in women. So if you go back and look at this diagram, you would have seen that we have talked about the hormones that are released all the way from pituitary, the pineal gland, the thyroid gland, the adrenal gland, the testes, the ovaries. We have not talked about what the pancreas releases. So that we have put in other hormones. So these hormones are referred to as gastrointestinal hormones or gut hormones. So you find several of them. In fact, there are more than hundreds. There are hundreds of these gastrointestinal hormones, some of which are not even not understood, not known the function that they are actually carrying out in the body. But a few of them are listed here. Gastrin, which stimulates the secretion of gastric hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and pepsinogen, which is the proenzyme of pepsin responsible for the breakdown of proteins in the digestive system. Secretin, which is one of the hormones that stimulates the pancreatic cells to produce some bicarbonate ions for the neutralization of hydrochloric acid. So when you have food that has started to be digested in the stomach, where it is mixed with hydrochloric acid, and it starts to move into the duodenum, into the ileum, then you have secretin being released to stimulate pancreatic cells to produce these bicarbonate ions to neutralize the hydrochloric acid, which has mixed with a chyme from the stomach before it gets into the duodenum and then the small intestine. Then we also have the cholecystokinin, which stimulates contraction of gallbladder and increases the flow of bile into the duodenum. So again, this is also happening again in the duodenum, the secretion of cholecystokinin, which will promote the secretion of some digestive enzymes from pancreas. Then we have the gastric inhibitory peptide. So this we know will stimulate the release of insulin from the pancreas. So the major enzyme the major hormone which we know pancreas releases, being insulin, which is responsible for the regulation of glucose concentration in the blood, is stimulated by the gastric inhibitory peptide, which inhibits gastric hydrochloric acid secretion. And then the movement of the stomach, that's peristalsis, and then the emptying of the stomach into the duodenum. Of course, we have seen this insulin and glucagon doing the opposite of each other, as insulin reduces the concentration of glucose in the body, that is stimulating that process of glycogenesis. You have glucagon, which will be stimulating the process of glycogenolysis, the breakdown of glycogen to give you the monosaccharides glucose, which can then be metabolized to give you energy, or the process of glucogenesis, which is also the production of glucose molecules from some precursors into the blood. Then, of course, we have seen it, the insulin and glucagon, in that process of lipolysis, because we saw that earlier in our previous lecture. Then, apart from the thyroid hormones, which we saw releasing the thyroid gland, which we saw releasing those thyroid hormones, the triiodothyronine, tetraiodothyronine. Around that, we have what is referred to as the parathyroid hormone, the parathyroid gland, which releases the parathyroid hormone, which also goes into the regulation of calcium concentration, just as calcitonin, which we have seen earlier, also goes into that process of calcium concentration regulation in the blood. And that brings us to the end of studies on hormones. Yes, any questions so far before we bring our class to a close? Any questions? Yes, Patrick.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Sir, please, you said that the posterior pituitary gland does not fall under the master gland, which is the
not influenced by
hypothalamus.
Yes.
Yes, but initially you said that the pituitary gland is connected to your hypothalamus through a stalk of blood vessels and nerves. Yes, please, I don't get that concept very well.
Okay, so if you look at the very last and the very first of the summary of what we did in the last lecture, yes, you saw the diagram of the pituitary gland having the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary, which falls under the hypothalamus. But the release of the hormones, the antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, are not influenced by the hypothalamus. So hypothalamus acts only on the anterior pituitary, but it does not act on the posterior pituitary. That is what it is. Yes, there is that connection between the pituitary gland as a whole, but remember that pituitary gland is separated by some barrier, and you have the anterior pituitary, which is having that direct connection with the hypothalamus, which has that direct influence on it, but does not have that direct influence on posterior pituitary. Yes. Alex.
Okay. Hello, sir. Hello.
Yes, listening.
Please, my question is two. The first one is talking about the gonads. Basically, we made mention of the FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, and the luteinizing hormone. I want to know when a lady is menstruating, like in what instance is one produced and one will go down, and like how does it work? In what instance will one go up and the other will go down or something like that? Then sometimes too, when you go to hospital and you are pregnant, they will tell you to go and do a test, and they will see something there, the human chronic gonadotrophin in it. So what brings about that one? That's the first question.
Okay, so
then my last question is, you were talking about the pancreatic hormones, and you said basically that one will go under the gastrointestinal hormones. And I learned the pancreas has both the exocrine and the endocrine function. So I want to also know the mechanism in which glucagon and insulin is being alternated. Like in what instance will one go up and one goes down?
So
that is
your first question, which is on the gonads. So the last time when we talked about HCG, if you go back to the lecture that we went through, you see the pattern of HCG. That HCG is increased somewhere in the first trimester, that is in pregnancy, and that hormone is being released in the placenta. So that one is there. So if anything, you can refer to that last lecture, specifically to that graph. I provided it for you to see at what time that you find HCG being increased in the blood. Now, talking about the menstrual cycle. So here too, apart from these sex hormones, which is progesterone and which one? Estradiol, all of these follicle, you mentioned follicle stimulating hormone. what happens is, let's say menstruation, if you take hormone level against number of days, say after the menstruation from the first day to about the 5th day or so, you have the follicle stimulating hormone being released, which will cause the release of the how do you call it, the release of the follicles from the ovaries, which will result into what we call the menstruation. Now, after about, say, the 14th day thereabouts, you have the increase in the level of progesterone. Of course, that is understood because in pregnancy, you have progesterone being increased in high amounts for the implantation of the ovum and the maintenance of pregnancy. What it means is that if it so happens that there is fertilization of the ovum, then there should be that increase in the hormone progesterone, which will cause the implantation of the ovum. That means that is not going to be released as blood in menstruation, but rather there's going to be an implantation, by the placenta. And then you have progesterone increased in high amounts, which will be maintaining that pregnancy. Then you asked another question. Apart from the gonads, you were asking of something else. Can you remind me what you said? After you ask a question on gonads, you ask something else. Yes, Alex. Alex. All right. Alex is not talking. I wanted him to remind me of the second question after he has a question on the gonads. Patrick. Okay, you have put your hands down, which means Alex, I wanted you to remind me of what you said after the gonads. You said something else. It has escaped me.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, Alex.
Sorry, my microphone was muted.
Okay.
The question was the regulation of the insulin and the glucagon. Like how are they produced? Like in what instance is one produced and the other one have to go down and stuff?
Okay. So you asked a question on the insulin and glucagon. Now,
yes,
if you are looking specifically at the metabolism of carbohydrates, and you know these two hormones are doing the opposite of each other. So if you look at that carbohydrate metabolic pathway, and you at various stages. So in fact, even if you go very deep down into the cell where you have the production of pyruvate in glycolysis, and that pyruvate then goes into the production of acetyl-CoA, which goes into the tricarboxylic acid. That is, if you are going deep down into the cell to that particular process. What happens is that if you have in high quantities acetyl-CoA, that is enough to go into the tricarboxylic acid for the production of energy from the TCA cycle and even further the electron transport chain. Then, of course, it will mean that there will not be any need more for the breakdown of glucose to give you that 3 carbon molecule pyruvates, which will have to be going there. So when you go back now, if you look at really this diagram here, you come to realize that much of the regulation of the release of these hormones is by what is referred to as feedback inhibition. Specifically, that is a negative feedback because it's supposed to go and inhibit. So if you have enough of something already in the blood, then there is a feedback going to the glands. So back to anterior pituitary, back to hypothalamus, which will be telling the gland that, hey, there is enough of glucose already in the blood. We do not need enough glucose again. If that is it, then what is going to happen is that glucagon then starts to stimulate the process of glycogenesis, which means the excess glucose which is in the blood will now start to be forming glycogen, which will be stored in the liver or in the skeletal muscles. If it so happens that the opposite is what it is, that you do not have enough. So let's say sometime in the night when you are sleeping, you are not eating. That is a fasting period. So at that time, you will need to have enough energy in the body, and which means that there should be the breakdown of glycogen. So if that breakdown of glycogen, the hormone which goes in to kick that. So the opposite is what? Insulin causing the formation of glycogen from excess glucose, and glucagon rather doing the opposite of breaking down the glycogen which is in the liver. Or if it is that you are involved in a vigorous activity and you need energy urgently, then the glycogen which is stored in the skeletal muscles, glucagon kicks in to start the breakdown of that, glycogen, to start giving you glucose molecules, which will then go through that process of glycolysis, going down into Krebs cycle to give you energy. Michael. Sape. Now, I've noticed that anytime we are online and we pass about 1 hour, you see that our numbers are reducing. And that is understandable, because sitting down continuously for 1 hour online it can be hectic. So it will be good that we keep our meetings online, within that 1 hour range, so that we don't have a lot of us, we don't lose a lot of us along the line, and then we just be left with a few of us. So let's take, say, the last question from Michael, and then we close. So we meet the next time. Yeah.
Hello, sir.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah, please. My question is on last 2 weeks lecture.
Mm-hmm.
You made mention that hypothalamus is also referred to as master gland. But I also read in other books which also say that the pituitary gland is also called the master gland. So I want you to clarify on that.
Okay, so if you look at it, yes, of course, hypothalamus is not a gland. Hypothalamus is part of the brain. So if you see it in some books referring to the pituitary, the anterior pituitary specifically, as the master gland, fine, that's okay. But if you take it that the hypothalamus, which is part of the brain, is also releasing some hormones which act on the anterior pituitary. So what it means is that the hypothalamus is superior to the anterior pituitary. Then you can refer to it also as a master gland. So it's a matter of semantics. It's how you look at it. If you look at it as hypothalamus is part of the brain, and so it's not a gland, then you can say, okay, even though it is releasing some or inhibiting chemicals which is acting on the anterior pituitary, you don't consider it as a gland, but you are considering the anterior pituitary as a gland. So it's just a matter of how you look at it. Both are acceptable.
Right,
you can say that. Okay. So on that note, I would want us to bring our meeting to a close. As I said earlier, I've noticed after about an hour, you see that our numbers are just continue to reduce. And to say that those who are not in from the beginning, to give you the information that after we have finished with our lectures on hormones, the last thing which we have in the syllabus is biotransformation. And biotransformation, it's not much, it's not a lot of things to do. So we'll be able to cover that in one lecture, so that the next time we meet face to face, we should be able to finish. So that will be, I think, let's say in the 10th week. Let's say that's going to be 10th week, because if mid-semester is, in which week are we right now? I think we should be in our 7th or 8th week or so. So that if we alternate, 1 week passes and then we meet again, finally it will be like in the 10th week, so that we'll cover the very last thing in the 10th week, which will mean that we'll have like some 2 weeks for ourselves to do some revisions towards examination. And during that time, at least the workload on me will also reduce, so that I'll be able to put much more questions online for you to try your hands on and prepare yourself for exams. So that is to inform you that we are getting close, and we are on course. We are getting done with everything that we are supposed to do in this course. All right. So with that, see you next time. Thank you so much for your audience. Bye for now.